Let's take a look at your local market. And of course, we have seen the JSE sinking into red territory today after two good sessions of gains so far this week. Of course, the markets, their global markets, seeming to be making a rebound at the beginning of the week from a very, very bad week last week. But we are seeing them sinking back into red territory. We'll be talking to Nkosilathi about the factors there, but just looking at that JSE declining by 1%, that largely being led by the financial 15, followed by the resources 10 complex and the industrial 25. And joining me to share analysis on those moves is independent analyst Nkosilathi Dube. Thank you so much for your time, Nkosilathi. Inflation is softer in August in the US than in July, but the markets are bothered. What's rubbing the markets the wrong way?
Well, thank you for having me. It's very much an honor. Today, yes, we did see inflation data was somewhat mixed. The inflation rate came in at 2.5%. It slowed down from the prior month's reading of 2.9, and this marks a 3-year low too. So this decline was prompted by lower oil prices, which is a good sign that, some of the key drivers are essentially tapering off, and also that, the rate is coming in line with the 2% target. So it could reinforce a rate cut. But on the other hand, if you dig deeper, if you look at the core inflation, it was rather sticky, and that was largely due to elevated housing prices. So it could indicate that, inflation might still be a challenge for the Fed going forward. And that's why we're seeing some of today's downside pressures stemming essentially from the core inflation rate.
Talking about downside pressures, we saw that particularly with Amplats today. And of course, Anglo American, the parent company, they're starting to offload its stake in Amplats, implementing that accelerated book build where they basically sold or selling 5.3% of Amplats' shares. So I did see that Amplats actually was quite downbeat today, about 8%. And it was quite interesting to me because Anglo has touted this as a win-win situation both for Anglo and Amplats. So what's going on here?
Look, it may be investors just being cautious, waiting to see how the whole event plays out. We still have some negotiations on pricing. I think the Anglo American is planning to do a full exit. So there is still some shares that need to be offloaded. And it might just be investors waiting to see how that plays out, rather than just digging in and buying into something that might eventually, fall off based on its valuation. So it's definitely a counter to keep track of. We'll see how the events play out in future.
All right. Let's go. I was going to say, well, quite apt because I was saying let's grow, but let's also go to Growthpoint. They released their annual results today. Significant reduction in their financial metrics. Of course, they had guided for it. We did see some wins and some losses there in the different regions. What perspective did investors take here? Because I did see that the share price was down about 4% at some point.
Yes, I think the share price ended up closing at about 2% lower, and the results do show why. But, if you look at the results, we saw that group revenue was up about 5%, but the issue was now on the bottom line. Its distributable income per share was down about 10%, and this was largely due to the cost of funding outpacing the revenue growth. So funding costs were up about 16%, which compares to the 5% growth in revenue. And, investors were essentially losing confidence in that, given that, the property sector is quite capital intensive. It's highly sensitive to rates. And, the high interest rates have had a negative impact on its bottom line. And the company also cited that the high rates might continue to be a challenge going forward. So I think that's essentially one of the reasons why we saw the sell-off today.
Yeah. Another challenge that we saw was with the Super Group. After releasing their year-end results, we did see that stock sinking by almost 7%. Top line climbing 4.6%, but that's really like the last metric that we saw with growth there. We did see HEPS sinking by more than a quarter. Of course, pointing to some pressures, but also we saw a little bit of gains there in the different regions. What stood out for you there?
Right. So, the results did show weakness in the headline earnings per share did decline by about 26% despite the revenue increase. So yeah, investors lost confidence, leading to the sell-off today. What stood out for me in particular was that it cited some of the challenges in its European and UK businesses weighing on the earnings. But also on top of that, it faced some infrastructure challenges in South Africa, which impacted on its logistics solutions. Given that most of these issues have not necessarily been resolved fully, it might be a continued challenge for the business going forward. But then again, it's not all doom and gloom. It did increase its market share in Southern Africa. It reported new clientele. It also reported an increase in contract renewals that supported the growth in the market share. So it might be a good counter to look at for the long run, especially considering that potential rate cuts might be coming soon, and also that inflation has been declining. So this could ease the pressures on consumers, driving up overall demand. So in the long term, this could definitely support the financials.
Talking about support, what are you supporting this evening? Your stock pick for today, Nkosilathi?
So my stock pick for today is Pan-African Resources. I've been generally liking gold counters lately, but Pan-African Resources does stand out. It's been a beneficiary of the soaring gold prices. Year to date, its share price is up about 70%. It's one of those gold mining stocks that is well positioned in the industry with its lower cost gold production compared to some of its peers. But looking also at its earnings today, its production was up 6%, revealing some operational efficiencies. Its revenue was up 16%, and the bottom line was a hot figure, also up 30%. So growth prospects seem promising. It's got some ongoing commissioning of new mines, and it's outperformed its peers. So it's definitely a stock that I'll be keeping an eye on for the upside should the gold prices remain elevated.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and giving us insights on what has moved investors' money today, Nkosilathi. That was independent analyst Nkosilathi Dube.